Colson Whitehead, welcome to 7:30.
Hey, how do you do?
Now, one of the best compliments ever paid to you as a writer was by Time magazine, who described you as America's storyteller. Now, what are the features of your storytelling that with each novel you seem to create an entire world?
Well, I switch around genres a lot. I have historical novels, a zombie novel, a nonfiction book about the World Series of Poker. And it seems like if you know how to do something, why do it again? And so I've always roved from different kinds of stories. And that's a great thing about my job. I can always reinvent myself from book to book.
Now, the second volume of your what is now trilogy about Harlem comes out this year. What came to you first, the idea of that extraordinary location or the idea of a heist novel?
A heist novel. I love movies like Ocean's 11 and Heat, old 50s heist movies like Rififi, The Asphalt Jungle. And I thought to myself, can I do that? I think these guys have so much fun coming up with the capers and the characters. And so I was really just trying to do my own spin on a crime novel. And then my preoccupations take over. Ray Carney, the main character, appears, and it becomes its own sort of new thing.
It's also true that there aren't many books where you get to use the word capers, but I want to talk to you about that fantastic central character of Carney. What's the appeal of him to you as his creator, that dual personality he has between the respectable and aspiring guy, but also someone who's drawn to the potential of crime?
Yeah, I was trying to find a protagonist that would work in a heist novel, and I came up with The Fence. And The Fence will recirculate stolen goods and bring them back into respectability. And they might have a store like where they sell electronics, and in the back of the store is where they do all their dirty business. So that spoke to a divided nature and of all sorts of things you can do with that. And I think we understand that as human beings. We're one person at work, at home, by ourselves. We all have our secret compartments, just like Ray Carney. So he's a really fun character to explore. And
just explain a little bit for our audience who don't know the layers of Harlem. One of the things that's really interesting is the gradations within the society between the black-skinned blacks and the lighter-skinned blacks. Explain to me what that was all about and how it worked as a social construct.
Well, yeah, it's not just Harlem, it's everywhere. You get treated differently, you feel differently about yourself depending on how dark or light you are and what time period you're in. And so that's part of 1950s America and became part of the book. And it's one of the forces that works upon Carney. There's race and class, aspirational real estate dreams, and one of the fun things about the book is that there are 3 different stories, 3 different capers, and with each one I get to introduce a new sort of energy or force working on him. And sometimes it's the fact that he's darker skinned than some of the lighter skinned, well-to-do people, and sometimes it's just trying to move to a better apartment, something simple like that.
You said that writing Harlem Shuffle was also something of a not a mental break, but a relief from the very dark materials of Underground Railroad and the Nickel Boys. What kind of an impact did it have on you living in that dark subject matter for so long?
Well, usually I'll do a more serious book and then a more funny book, and it turns out a book about slavery, like the Underground Railroad, didn't have a lot of room for my kind of comic play. There are jokes in the Nickel Boys. The kids are in a terrible place, and gallows humor is a way of surviving in that place. But immediately when I started with Harlem Shuffle, the tone is different. There's room for jokes. There's fun. There's room for playing with the genre. And Ray Carney gets to win sometimes. He doesn't always win. Sometimes he's outwitted. But the characters in those last 2 books are so constrained by their social circumstances, slavery, Jim Crow America. And so it was fun to have a character who can win, who can outwit and thrive sometimes.
Now, in Harlem Shuffle, this is set against a period, obviously, of intense racial turbulence in the United States. And again, for those who haven't read it yet, the part of the origin story are riots that erupt when a white cop kills a black boy. Now, that sounds like a very contemporary story. And I understand that these are characters, and I understand that you're an artist, but at the same time, I am interested to know whether you think the fundamentals of racism in America have shifted since then.
Well, I mean, since then, since slavery, I mean, when I was riding the Underground Railroad and writing about slave catchers, and it was their job before there was a real police force to stop any black person demand to see their ID. And the way that former slaves talked about slave catchers is the same way that I would talk about being stopped by the police, the same way that teenagers I know talk about that situation. You have to have ID or else things can go a terrible way. So obviously it's not 1965, it's not 1873, but that relationship between the police state and African Americans remains the same. Some of the dynamic remains the same. I was not, when I decided to have the book end in 1964 and have this real-life police brutality case, I wasn't foreseeing that when I finished the book, George Floyd would be murdered that week. That was a strange coincidence of timing. But it turns out that if you wait a week or a month, there'll be another high-profile police brutality case. It's always been a feature of my life as a black man in America. And we talk about it. We have a conversation about race and policing, and then we forget about it, and it erupts again.
Now, you did make a decision to turn Harlem Shuffle. I think you made a decision. This wasn't in it at the beginning, to turn it into a trilogy. So, just briefly, what's next in Harlem?
Well, it's just been a crazy experience. I've never followed a character to a second book, but I kept coming up with capers and jobs, different kinds of criminal shenanigans. And so the 3 books will take place in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's following Ray Carney as a 30-year-old, a 40-something, a 50-something. In the first book, his kids are 1 and 2 years old. Then they're in college, and then they're out of the house. So it's tracing a guy into middle age. And at the same time, the city is changing. There's the 60s exuberance of New York City, the 70s despair of the fiscal crisis, and then in the 80s, we get that glitzy, glamorous Wall Street rebirth. And so both the city's fortunes are rising and falling, and Ray Carney's, and it's just been a really wonderful experience.
Colson Whitehead, America's Storyteller. I think it's a perfect description, and we're very glad to have had you on our program this evening. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much.